So thank you, Lynette, for the introduction. It's a pleasure to hold this dialogue with Yuki. I first worked with Yuki in 2018 when I was one of the curators for Bangkok Art Biennale, and in 2022 I contributed a chapter in her catalog for the New Zealand Pavilion in Venice. So just a brief intro on Yuki. She is an interdisciplinary artist of Japanese and Samoan descent. Through a research-based approach, her practice seeks to challenge the dominant and singular historical narratives and their persistence in the socio-political climate through a wide range of media, including performance, sculpture, video, photography, and curatorial practice. Notably, she became the first Pacific artist to represent New Zealand at the 59th Venice Biennale in 2022. From the perspective of Fa'afafine, Samoan for In the Manner of a Woman, Samoa's third gender community, her critically acclaimed exhibition titled Paradise Camp, upcycled selected paintings by the late post-impressionist French artist Paul Gauguin, believed to have been inspired by Samoa. So I begin, Yuki, this dialogue with the success of Paradise Camp in Venice, and I hear that it will have iterations, right? I think we're counting 4 iterations after Venice. So just wanted to know your thoughts about this, this interest in your work in Venice. Maybe you have some thoughts about that. Yeah.
Interesting. Thank you. I would like to take this opportunity to thank you, Patrick Flores, for continuing to support my work, and the staff and the management of National Gallery Singapore for hosting me here on this talk today. When I represented Aotearoa New Zealand at the Venice Biennale, with my exhibition entitled Paradise Camp, which was presented in the Arsenale, remember that back in 2022, it was Cecilia Alamani who was curating the group show. And then everybody would check out the Giardini, the group show at the Giardini. And then, so when you come to the Arsenale, you actually have to walk through the group exhibition before you actually, enter the first pavilion, the second pavilion, because the first pavilion is Philippines. And then the second pavilion after that is Aotearoa New Zealand. And then, with Cecilia's exhibition, she was, I think, capturing the zeitgeist of the time, which was reflected in the way that her group show kind of unrolled, in curating all these group of artists who are women, trans, and gender non-binary artists, and this is also compounded by the zeitgeist of the time, where there were controversies about gender politics, indigenous sovereignty, Black Lives Matter, and Me Too movement. And then so by the time everybody arrived in the Arsenale, they went through the group show, and they come out and they would see the Filipino pavilion and then the New Zealand pavilion. I kind of feel like Cecilia's group show kind of formed the context, to see my work. So in a way, it was kind of like a blessing in disguise. So by the time they actually entered, Paradise Camp, they kind of got it, where all of these issues kind of converge into this one place, where the specificity of the Fa'afafine experience, which is a third gender community in Samoa. So in Samoa, there are 4 culturally recognized genders, which is Tane, which is a cisgender man, Fa'afine, which is a cisgender woman. So Fa'afafine is broken down into 2 words, so Fa'a meaning in the manner of, and Fa'afine meaning woman. So together it means Fa'afafine, in the manner of a woman. Those assigned male at birth, like me, who express their gender in a feminine way. And we also have Fa'atama, those assigned female at birth, who express their gender in a masculine way. However, in the post-colonial context, the Fa'afafine and Fa'atama, the third and fourth gender, our genders are not sort of legally recognized. And then so that becomes very problematic, especially being an island at the front line of climate change. And then so that's where sort of intersection of where Paradise Camp was about. And I just kind of feel like Paradise Camp was presented at the right time, at the right place, to make all this noise in the media. And I'm actually very surprised that, after when it premiered at the Venice Biennale, and then, it was presented at the Powerhouse Museum, in Gardigoland, Sydney, which was a partner of the New Zealand Pavilion, to Lisa Havila, the director, who's a strong advocate for my work. And it's opening in Samoa this year on the 1st of June to coincide with our National Independence Day. It's on view for 10 months. It would subsequently tour the Sainsbury Centre for Visual Arts in Norwich in the UK, opening in March of 2025. And then it will tour the Museum of Tahiti in November of 2025. And then, so my gallerist just recently received an expression of interest for touring Paradise Camp somewhere in Europe. So I have to say I'm very blessed, of this, enormous interest, to tour the exhibition. But at the same time, I don't want Paradise Camp to be like my own legacy, because, Paradise Camp is like one of many things that I make. But I just felt that, when Natalie King, my curator, who curated Paradise Camp, and we joined forces to submit our application to Creative New Zealand, which is the National Arts Development Agency of the Government of New Zealand, who basically oversees the management of the Venice Biennale, I kind of felt that Paradise Camp, among many major projects that I'm developing, I felt that Paradise Camp was the project that I felt, that could contribute strongly, in the wider discussion of what Cecilia was talking about.
And thank you. A quick follow-up, Yuki. What was the reception in New Zealand?
It's kind of like quite dead, because the thing is that so for people in Aotearoa New Zealand to travel over to Europe, remember that, at that time, when Venice Biennale was happening, remember we're coming out of like a 2-year lockdown period. And then so, when I signed my life away as an employee of Creative New Zealand and the government of New Zealand, if I caught COVID and something happens to me, it's the government, government has to take care of it. So they were very risk averse. And then so usually what happens is that, there's the New Zealand at Venice Patrons program, the artist is there, there's a big delegation that flies over, but it didn't kind of happen that way for me this year, in 2022. So everybody kind of heard of the Venice Biennale through the media, but not necessarily sort of see it like in real life. Only very few people, flew over to see it. But hopefully one day, it would go back to Aotearoa New Zealand.
Yeah, thank you. So we organized this dialogue into 3 parts. Now, the first part, Yuki, is on queer and community. The queer community in your own context. I'm interested in the formation of the subjectivity of the queer, and also the society or the social context that supports it. So maybe you can take it from there. Yeah.
Okay, sure. So I first of all would like to read you an excerpt from a creation story of Samoa that's documented by LMS missionary by the name of Reverend John Stair. And then so this excerpt was published in 1835, and it says, the Sāmoa creation story, and it goes, on the formation of 2 bodies being complete, they lived, but they were both males, and dwelt on the land on which they were formed. One day, whilst fishing with a net called the Whaamutsu, one of them was injured by a small fish called the Law, which caused his death. Upon this, Tuli returned to the skies and bewailed the loss of one of the inhabitants of his land to his father, when Ngaitosi was directed by Tangaloa to proceed to the earth to reanimate the dead body, previously to which, however, he changed the sex of the deceased male to that of a female. The two then became man and wife, the parents of the human race. And then so this creation story basically alludes to the formation of the third and fourth sex in Samoan culture. And then so in the traditional context, Fa'afafine and Fa'atama, we are caregivers of young children and the elderly, and that's what we do. We're also there to also participate in help strengthening the kinship system of our clan that actually helps provide the resilience, you know, of the Samoan culture that survived for the last 3,000 years, you know, pre-contact. So here's a short video of the community. Living in the Samoan archipelago, located in central Polynesia in the Moana, I'm known locally as a Fa'afafine. The word Fa'afafine means in the manner of a woman. This is a Samoan word used to describe people like myself who are assigned male at birth, who express their gender in a feminine way. Fa'afafine is one of 4 genders culturally recognized in Samoa for millennia. We also have Fa'atama, meaning in the manner of a boy, a term used to describe those assigned female at birth who express their gender in a masculine manner. Fa'afafine and Fa'atama are some of the continuous, original, indigenous queer cultures of Polynesia and the Pacific Islands, and there are many versions of us across the Moana. Today, the term Fa'afafine is generally used to describe the LGBTIQ+ community. However, what makes us distinct from the global pride movement is our ancestral ties to land and kinship systems that is intrinsic part of our identity as Samoans. Yeah. So as you can see, they come in all shapes and sizes. Yep. Okay, so I want to talk about the intersection between Fa'afafine, Fa'atama, and natural disaster and the wider climate change context. So as you can see in the gender equality briefing for Samoa that's been reported by UN Women, that Samoa traditionally has 4 cultures. However, the third and fourth gender are not legally recognized. And then, so this is actually partly due to the New Zealand colonial government. So Samoa was part of New Zealand's colonial realm country from 1914 to 1962. And then so on the eve of independence, National Party leader, Prime Minister Keith Holyoake, introduced the Crime Ordinance Act of 1961, directed at the Fa'afafine community. And then so the 2 laws were that the first one is that the banning of any male impersonating a woman in public, and the second one was homosexuality. And then so anybody that was caught breaking these 2 laws were fined and imprisoned up to 6 months. And then so during that time, in the early 60s, many Fa'afafines became self-imposed exiles, and then migrated to neighboring territory of American Samoa in hope to seek refuge. But at that time, under the American military dictatorship, they were, strongly, opposing any natives that were speaking against American occupation of the islands. And then so thanks to the efforts of 3 Fa'afafine lawyers, Imania Brown, Phineas Hartson, and Alex Sua, they submitted they made a submission to the Samoa Law Reform Commission to try and abolish these 2 laws. And then so the Samoan government agreed to abolish the female impersonation law, but the homosexuality law still remains in government, and it's illegal, but it's not imposed. But that doesn't necessarily mean that, we're kind of like off the hook, because, governments can change in the future. They can easily, reenact and, enforce those anti-homosexuality laws in the island. And then so how this kind of intersects with the Fa'afafine Fa'atama identity is that I want to take you back to the tsunami, this horrible tsunami that took place on the 29th of September in 2009, which took place in the Sāmoan archipelago, which was responsible for the death of 189 people. And then so among the first responders to this tsunami site were a group of Fa'afafinis in the village, and Fa'atamas in the village. And then so they were among the first responders, helping to pull bodies and body parts out of the debris, helping to move families into the evacuation centers, and then helping to also, help people resettle in higher ground. And then so not only, you have Fa'afafini Fa'atamas on the ground supporting with the rescue efforts, but the Fa'afafini Fa'atamas who are also working behind the scenes in government and or NGO organizations like Red Cross, Disaster Risk Management, the Department of Health, Infrastructure, all these departments were able to sort of coordinate their rescue efforts because of the Fa'afafinis that already knew each other in these government departments. They were able to synchronize everything. But when it came to the report, about the tsunami, the Fa'afafine experience kind of got muddled up in the experience of men. And then the Fa'atama experience kind of got muddled up in the experience of women. And then so our contribution as third and fourth gender in this natural disaster, wasn't mentioned at all, which is really problematic because the reason why our ancestors thrived, for the past 3,000 years, because all the four genders, we worked in unison that provided our resilience. So with the onward impact of contact and missionization and colonization, these four genders became fractured, and only two genders were prioritized over third and the fourth one, right? And then so in the context of climate change, if we are really going to develop a resilient culture and country and as people, we really need to reinstate, Fa'afafine Fa'atama back into the gender cultural matrix. And then so that is what essentially the core purpose of why I made Paradise Camp. And then so unfortunately, if I take the Paradise exhibition as is now back to Samoa without going to Venice, I don't think the people in Samoa would have cared for it. I actually had to go to Venice in order for my community to be recognized in our own island, which is a population of 250,000 people. Yeah.
Thank you.
100,000 people. Yeah.
You mentioned earlier that the Fa'afafini movement or culture is very much grounded in land and kinship.
Yes.
So I think this leads us to the next part of the conversation, which is the relationship between your work and climate.
Yes.
Yeah. So maybe you can walk us through that
very sure.
intimate relationship. Yeah.
Yeah. So so I just want to allude back to the creation story and then how the dead body was reanimated, right? And so that creation story for me is kind of alludes to the relationship that indigenous peoples, and particularly Fa'afafine and Fa'atama, have with the land. Because the natural environment is Fa'afafine and Fa'atama. The natural environment is queer. But because of the Western dogma of Western gender binary systems that enforces markers, you don't actually get the full nuances of what it's like, for us as indigenous peoples connected to our land. Because our land was actually fished up by the gods. So it's, it's where we bury our ancestors. It's where we plant our trees. It's where our ancestral body become decomposed and become one with the land, which we then grow food from it. So it's this never-ending cycle, I guess, of our connection to the land. But I moved back to Samoa 12 years ago and then began documenting climate change in the island. And then so you have Cyclone Gita. So what you have is that, the cyclone season in Samoa is from November to March. And And then, so what you have is that every time we have a cyclone, the whole township of Apia, kind of gets flooded. And then so this rain flood water doesn't sort of seems to cease into the ocean, because the ocean is also high tide, which is kind of pushing the rainwater back into the township. And so that's what it looks like, so the water's kind of like up here. And I've also been documenting sea level rise. And then so what you see here on your right-hand side, I guess on your left-hand side, it's 4:00 in the afternoon, and then when it's low tide. So it's only when it's the ocean is in low tide you can actually see these tree pinnacles, where the soil has been salinated by salt water, that they can't survive with salt water. So it just goes higher and higher and higher, and it actually shrinks the island. And then so the global average for sea level rise around the world is like 2.8 to 3.5 millimeters per year, but in Samoa it actually rises up to 4 millimeters, and it's rising, and it's actually shrinking the island. And then so what many villages are doing now is that they actually have to relocate inland. And then there are stress that's involved, in actually relocation. And a lot of that stress kind of gets scapegoated, to the Fa'afafine and Fa'atama community. So we often get blamed for climate change, for the economic recession, and COVID, and many other things. But thankfully, the Fa'afafine and Fa'atama community, we all band together when we need to, and I believe that we have a very resilient community. Yeah, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you just have to just like leave them alone. They can look after themselves. Like, that's not the answer. The answer is that we all need to work in unison, in the wave of our ancestors.
Just to return to the earlier statement about nature being queer. So how do you negotiate that? That proposition that nature is queer? Is it because of the reanimation in the mythology? Is that?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So obviously, when the missionary recorded the creation story, they have to be actually very accurate about what they're recording, because they use that as data to how to convert them into cisgendered, heteronormative Christianity, right? And then so I know, and then what's really interesting is that story, not many Samoans know about it, until I dig it up, and they kind of all go silent. There is a reason why Fa'afafinis and Fa'atama exist, because of that story. And another thing is that in the surrounding ocean of the Samoan archipelago, there are over 900 coral reef fish species that actually change sex. So, for example, that Disney movie called Finding Nemo? Well, like the big dad eventually will turn into a female. Yeah, but they don't talk about that, in the Disney film, because it might be very sort of dogmatic, or something, for children. And same as Lion King. So there is homosexuality among lions. So we have a pink clown skunkfish, Tsu'ulumane. So we have Samoan names for these different fish species that our ancestors recorded. So they were marine biologists, in a sense. You also have the sungale, or the wasi, where when they so the pink clown, the skunkfish. So when they are born, they are all assigned male at birth, and the biggest male change their sex into a female. And then so the sungale, or the wasi, they are both assigned male and female, but the female later changes their sex into a male later in life. You also have the moray eel. This is intersex. You also have the goby, where when a same-sex goby colonize a coral patch, one of them changed their sex. So there is scientific evidence, that not all creatures, in the animal kingdom is heteronormative.
In that way, queerness is natural, right? As you
Yes.
you mentioned, and mythological as well through the reanimation, and finally political, right? Because the Fa'afafine community is part of this ecological movement to respond to the climate crisis. Is that a right?
And to restore it in the way. To restore it in the ways of our ancestors. Because I think that once we actually reinstate and reinstall the four genders, then it opens up possibilities, to renegotiate ways that we're actually working with nature and including climate change.
Yeah, so that's also a good way to lead to the next part, which is the last final part of the conversation, Yuki. And this is about your work on colonial critique, specifically focusing on Gauguin as the master narrative, the scene of the crime, no? Yeah. So maybe you can begin discussion on that.
Okay, sure. So I was fortunate to have a solo exhibition at the Met in 2008, which is the first time I actually saw paintings by Paul Gauguin. And then so what I was captured by in his paintings is how some of the faces of the models in the background, looked very Samoan. And then I also began thinking back about an essay that was written by a Māori art historian scholar by the name of Ngāhuia Te Kotuku, who talked about how some of the models in Paul Gauguin's paintings may have been Mahu, or the third gender version of Tahiti. And then so when I looked deeper into his work, I kind of, these are just some of many examples that I found. So this is a section in the painting, which is where do we come from, what are we, where are we going? And then what you see here is this mahus, how do you identify Mahu? So they usually sort of, masculine presenting, sort of male presenting, but effeminate. And then this is, those that I sort of identified in the red arrows, I kind of feel like they're Mahu. And then so, wow, that's really interesting. And then so, as much as problematic of how Gauguin depicted the indigenous subjects in French Polynesia, it also provides me a record of the existence of Mahu during his, around the time that when he was in Tahiti and Marquesas during that time in the early 1900s. So I kind of see his work as like a visual record of Tahitian queer culture at the time. So when I did a little bit of more digging, because I was so curious to why is it that, Gauguin paintings looked so Samoan. So this is one of actually many examples that I found where you see a photograph of a Samoan man with the customary tattoo, and how his composition of the back view has been lifted, in a painting entitled Three Tahitians. In the middle figure. So when you actually try and merge the photograph and the painting into a collage, then you have this kind of like a seamless collage where you can see that Gauguin actually painted the shadow on the back even like very perfectly. Yeah. And then so maybe this particular archive is something that might be appropriate to the tropical exhibition. So this is a National Geographic advertisement that was published in 1986. And the campaign is called Princess Cruise Exotic Adventures. And then I don't know if you can read it, but this particular campaign is kind of like an amalgamation of 5 different paintings from Gauguin, with the cruise ship at the back. And then so this cruise ship would actually travel to these places such as Hawaii, Tahiti, South Pacific, Orient, Colonial America, Canada, New England, South America, Amazon, and Transcanal. So the Gauguin aesthetics has always sort of been used to describe like the global South. Yeah. And then so this is a new work that I'm including in the Touring of Paradise Camp in Samoa. So I guess I was kind of inspired by memes. And then so what you see here is, these two people in a painting entitled Nafea Te Whai Poipo, or When Will You Marry? They're having a conversation with each other. So the person at the back is saying, did you know in 2015, the painting Nafea Whai Poipo, When Will You Marry 1892 by Paul Gauguin was sold for US $259 million to a museum in Qatar? And in response, the other person is saying, whoa, in 2023, the cost of a New Zealand aid to Sāmoa was US $260,186 million. I think that's how I say it. And so what I'm trying to allude here in this particular work is that the cost of a painting is the cost of New Zealand's aid to Sāmoa. And then so what I'm also trying to allude to in this work is like what people value. What people value. And then I guess you can kind of sort of interpret that in like many different ways. Like how could a painting worth, an aid of a country to a developing country? And then so another idea that I've been playing with Paradise Camp is the idea of upcycling. So in the context of sustainability, upcycling means that you take something old and then you improve it. And then so I see my photographs as being like an improved version of Gauguin's paintings. Thank you. And then so I've also been looking at like the technical features in a camera. So when you go soft focus, I think that's when it kind of looks like impressionist. But when you go focus, that's when it's like realism. So by using the technical feature of focus in the camera, I'm directing audience attention to where exactly the inspiration came from, which is Samoa. So what you see in the Paradise Camp photographs is like my group of my Fa'afafine and Fa'atama friends, there's 52 of them, reclaiming the narrative of paradise, that is often used to mask the colonial violence that comes to us as climate change. So this is the tour of the exhibition in Venice.
Paradise Camp is an ensemble exhibition of 12 new, luscious photographs shot on location in Sāmoa, from rural villages to churches, plantations and heritage sites, with a local cast and crew of close to 100 people. Yuki's photographs repurpose and upcycle paintings by Paul Gauguin, created during his time in Tahiti and the Marquesas. Yuki situates her photographs against a vast wallpaper of an oceanscape decimated by the 2009 tsunami. The suite of photographs is accompanied by an archive section highlighting Yuki's deep research in Polynesian queer histories. As well as a single-channel moving image called First Impressions, Paul Gauguin. Perhaps the most astonishing photograph is an elaborate portrait where Yuki returns indoors to a studio in Auckland, casting herself as Gauguin. Through this ingenious role reversal, Kihara commands her own space within the traditions of art history, while upending the conventions of portraiture itself. By addressing the intersectionality between decolonisation, identity politics, and environmental crises, Paradise Camp takes the tempo of our times from a staunchly Pacifica perspective.
I'm going to finish on this last slide. Thank you.
Ooh la la! Beautiful dusky maiden. Magnifique.
Talofa lava. My name is Yuki Kihara. I'm an interdisciplinary artist of Samoan and Japanese descent. I was born in Samoa but migrated to New Zealand, and I have a joint citizenship of New Zealand and Samoa.
Oh, bonjour. Je m'appelle Paul Gauguin. And as you know, I'm a painter, printmaker, and sculptor, and I'm French. Did you say you're from Samoa? Is that close to Tahiti? I lived in paradise with the savages of Tahiti and the Marquesas for the last 10 years of my life. Some of the finest and the most famous work was created there.
Yes, I'm familiar with your works inspired by Tahiti and the Marquesas. But I couldn't help noticing that although you never stepped foot in Samoa, you based several of your paintings on photographs of people and places in Samoa, where I come from, but you passed the subjects off as Tahitians.
Samoa? No, I don't think so. I was never in this Samoa.
What about sacred waters? Isn't your painting inspired by a photograph taken in Samoa? Maybe you saw this postcard when you were in Aotearoa, New Zealand back in 1895.
Oh, oui. I did visit the Auckland Art Gallery on my way to Tahiti that second time. I made some beautiful sketches of that Maori art. Oui, maybe. I did pick up a few postcards there.
Well, they still have a copy of your signature in the visitor's book at the Auckland Art Gallery. You may have seen some photographs taken by New Zealand colonial photographer Thomas Andrew while you were there. Some of his photographs are in your journal, Noa Noa. And the guy in the middle of your painting, three Tahitians? Interesting, don't you think?
Well, yes, that is interesting, but I...
Falong mai oi Paul. It's been great to catch up, but I have to go. I'm representing Aotearoa New Zealand at the 59th Venice Biennale with my own exhibition, Paradise Camp. So fasui fua. And that's the end of my slides. Thank you. Thank you, Patrick.
Yeah, before we open this discussion to questions from the floor, maybe you can just walk us through how you made that film, Yuki. Like also I think we are interested in your method also of research and how it feeds into the production of your work.
Thank you. So it first came about seeing these paintings at the Met and then wondering why they look Samoan. And then so what I did is that I went through all of the paintings that he produced during his time in French Polynesia, and then compared it to photographs of New Zealand colonial photographer Thomas Andrew. And then because when I saw the paintings, I kind of saw Thomas Andrew's photographs. And then so, once you start sort of looking at the paintings, looking at the photographs, and then I started finding all these Thomas Andrew photographs in Gauguin's work. So Thomas Andrew was a New Zealand colonial photographer who established his studio in Samoa during the early 1900s. He is one of the few Western photographers who set up his studio in Samoa. And although he did some really dodgy studio photography, of young girls, he's also, documented a lot of important political events in Samoa. So his photographs, in Pacific history is very important, and specifically to Samoan history. And then so when I was able to identify the photograph of a Samoan man with the pe'a or the tattoo and the three Tahitians, looking exactly the same, that's when I realized that, okay, I think I've got something here. And I kept on digging and digging and digging. So what you see here is just like, it's like a scratch of many things that not many people know about, this indirect connection between Gauguin and Samoa, until I come around as a Samoan artist to kind of unpack it all and then to sort of reclaim the narrative. Yeah.
It's like the reception of this in Samoa. I mean, like in let us say, art history in Samoa. How would you describe?
Well, the thing is that you don't necessarily need to know who Paul Gauguin is to actually enjoy the work. Because, the title is provided, you see the artwork there. So these photographs are actually going to be presented as an outdoor exhibition at the Salitonga Sands Resort and Spa in Samoa, in Upolu Island. So it's actually an outdoor exhibition. And so there's a reason why I'm actually presenting it as an outdoor exhibition at a resort, because resort is often seen as a paradise where we all come together to create this fantasy. So I kind of want Paradise Camp to be part of that narrative, this fictional narrative about, people coming together to create this whatever paradise is. And then, so, when I was talking to each of the models about, okay, this is the painting, this is how you're going to pose, da-da-da-da-da. The thing is that in Samoa, they don't actually teach Western art history because there's no relevance to it in our culture. Yeah. Yeah. They just don't. It's a waste of time. So when they actually see the paintings, oh, well, that's interesting. But, for many other girls, they were more interested about how they're going to appear on camera. That's just the nature of Fafafing is really. So I was like, no, but I don't like that pose. I can do a better one. I said, no. No. It's, do what I tell you. But it was I had an amazing time. I had an amazing crew from Samoa, so it involved close to 100 people. 52 of those were the models from the Fa'afafine Fa'atama community. I actually worked with a lot of the cast crew who was already working on, film projects in Samoa from Australia, like Australian Survivor. I don't know if you guys know Australian Survivor. Yeah, it's a Survivor series, so they also film in Samoa as well. So, I was able to use the kind of like the film methodology of production to help, manage this big cast and crew of people. Yeah.
And what about the portraiture, the prosthetics, right? Yeah.
Okay, so that took me like maybe 3.5 hours to get into my Gauguin drag. But prior to that, I actually had a coach, an acting coach. So I worked with Alpha Mayava, who's a friend of mine. He's a bit of a comedian, and then so I sought his training, to help me get into character as Gauguin. So, let's play the cliche French guy, with their nose in the air and, yeah. But, you have Yuki coming, as a counterpoint, to kind of destroy it all. Yeah.
My last question is on the term in Paradise Camp, which is camp. How do you conceptualize camp in relation to paradise?
Okay, so the camp that I'm talking about is like a gay camp. It's not the camp like, people coming together to have a picnic or something, yeah. Because, the idea of paradise is very camp, But at the same time, like, by putting the word paradise and camp together, I knew that there will be friction because the idea of paradise is essentially, is very heteronormative, because it's a story of Adam and Eve, who are like white, cisgender, heterosexual, everything that's what modernism stands for. And then so camp is there to kind of subvert the heteronormative idea of paradise. Yeah.
I thought that the camp also referred to the military history
Yeah, it can
in
be that
Sāmoa.
too.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, when we were organizing the photo shoot, like it was very militant because we had to wake up at 2:00 in the morning to drive to a site, to wait for the sunrise to go up at 5:00 in the morning. So it was like a real military operation of working with 52 divas. Yeah. You've seen it all. Yeah. But we had a great time. Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you, Yuki, for this conversation. Now we can take questions from the floor. It's a fun conversation. I'm sure you have questions to ask Yuki in relation to her work.
I think Bing wants to say something. It's okay. Just acknowledging Bing here. Hi, Bing.
Yeah.
I guess I'll ask a question pertaining to self-fashioning, perhaps. There's a kind of staging, especially the performative aspects of portraiture. So I'm just wondering if you could kind of expand a bit about that and its relation to the inversion of gender identity. Obviously, as you mentioned, there's drag, and you hired an acting coach to train you for this performance. So I'm just wondering if you could kind of expand on that. Thank you.
So the traditional portraiture, is not only a colonial construct, but it's also heteronormative because it kind of fixes people to a certain point in time to how the sitter wants to be represented. And then so a lot of portraiture out there, didn't, queer, people who are trans and gender non-binary, indigenous people, were never had the opportunity to be a sitter. Because, they weren't the subject matter until, we were kind of like used as a spice to and live in the dal dish, So in my drag as Paul Gauguin, I'm also conscious about the way in which that he portrayed people. So, I wanted to come across as an obnoxious bastard, so that Yuki can really take him down. So I had to work with the actor, to really create that tension of being an obnoxious bastard. And this is all kind of drawn from his, biographical data, So Paul Gauguin, he was a stockbroker. He made a lot of money, but making money didn't fulfill his life. So he went to Martinique. He went to Tahiti. He found him. He thought he found his paradise until, it was already taken over by the French. But by then, he's already left everything. So he needed to create a fictitious narrative. And he did it really well. But unfortunately, but the thing is that towards the end of his life, he actually died broke. And then two of his wives, Tahitian wives, also left him. And then so I'm actually going to Tahiti in June this year to kind of like follow his footsteps. But what's really interesting thing is that, the locals in Tahiti, they don't really care for Gauguin at all. To the locals, it's kind of like a tourist trinket or something. They don't really care about it. Yeah, and then, in Samoa, like nobody knows or cares for who Gauguin is. But every time I travel outside of the Pacific, that's how I'm often perceived. So yeah, I try and sort of tap into different audiences, to have a wide, engaging conversation, but centered to a Samoan experience.
It's like the queer community in Tahiti connected to the queer community in Samoa?
Yes and no. So there is the Pacific Diversity, PSDN, so Pacific Sexual Diversity Network. So these are gender and sexual minority activists across the Pacific region that's created a network, to help, lobby governments and policies and legislations. And then so through that small group of activists, they're in touch. But I'm hoping that my visit to Tahiti is going to, to be one of many visits where maybe perhaps in the future I could actually bring a Samoan delegation, to Tahiti, and then to, rekindle, our ancestral connections. And then so in the Pacific, our language is rooted to an Austronesian language group that came out of Taiwan. And so because we share the same language, we also share similar cultures. So you'll find that, just about every culture in the Pacific, has a third and fourth gender community. Yeah.
Thing to explore, no, in the future, in that connection.
Yes.
Yeah. So more questions from the floor? Yes, Roger.
Thanks so much for your sharing. I actually have two questions, if I may. The first one is short. I wonder if you have any thoughts on the tropical exhibition that you'd like to share. The second question is a little longer. It's about your relationship to art history. I was really interested to hear about your research methods and the ways that you compared the paintings to the photographs. And I wonder whether that has led to dialogues with people who maybe call themselves art historians instead of calling themselves artists, or whether you see your work as maybe not just upcycling Paul Gauguin, but maybe also upcycling art history.
All of the above. But to your first question, it's something that I've actually shared with my colleagues here at the National Gallery of Singapore, is that I really wish that there were more indigenous artists from South America participating, because we are all indigenous to somewhere, right? And then what I really like about the Asian side is that this is an artist from Singapore, who made this painting. This is an artist from Manila. This is an artist from this and that and that. But their conversation with the South American counterpart is with the white settler artists. It's not with the indigenous people. So I think there is a room for more further development of that narrative, to engage more indigenous artists. But I also overheard in the lunch that in the process of National Gallery Singapore, engaging with their South American counterpart, one of their indigenous curators left. So maybe perhaps, that could be the reason why, there weren't any sort of visible, involvement of indigenous artists. Yeah, because you have these sort of pastoral paintings, from South America, where all these lands have been sort of transformed into cow farms and things, but the counter narrative of that is, an indigenous artist talking about the decimation of their landscape. Yeah. So, yeah, maybe that's a future project. Yep. So with the second question, one of the responses that I got, because we didn't have a New Zealand docent at the Venice Biennale because of the travel COVID restriction. So I actually lived in Venice for 4 months to be a docent in my own exhibition. And then so I came across many art historians, who would question my findings and whether it was published. I was like, well, I don't need to publish it, I just make the artwork. Isn't that another form of publishing? But I think that goes to show the power of literature and the power of words, and then how the system is facts, cannot be told through art. I don't know why, but I could give a scientific delivery of it, but I call the exhibition Paradise Camp, so I have to do something camp.
Yeah. But picking up on Roger's question, have you had any conversation with like art historians about
Yes, I
your
have.
work?
Yeah,
So,
they're dumbfounded, that that I was able to make this comparison. But I think it took a person like me, a Samoan, to kind of decipher things. Because I've been looking at Samoan colonial photography over the last 20 years of my life. So I know, who took what photos. I've been a research fellows at museums and things like that. So, museology is like my middle name. And just through pure artistic research. Yeah. And I think artistic research is something that is valid. Yeah.
you think this, well, also picking up on the question of Roger about art history being transformed because of your work? Do you see that happening?
Yes and no. I mean, I do engage with art history as a sculptural material, but that's not the only narrative I go with. There's many other narratives like the environment, climate change, and many other things that kind of get woven into it. But at the same time, art history is also, contested. And I remember like the previous speaker, talked about like, the non-Western art. I think the moment when we start using the word non-Western is when we fully realize who we are. Yeah, because when you always say non-Western, you are always kind of like putting yourself in the binary. So when do we drop the Western and just be fabulous and just be ourselves? Just be ourselves. Like why do we have to make a reference to them all the time? I mean, I can't talk because of my reference to Gauguin, but I had a valid reason.
Yeah, but the Paradise Camp, you think the entry point was Gauguin or Fafafini?
I think it's layered.
Okay.
I think for the Venice audience, like when they looked at the photos, they immediately thought of Gauguin. So obviously, the Venice audience is a particular kind of audience. So they're really well read and they know their art history and all of that. But I also wanted to create Paradise Camp so that multiple people could engage with the work. I mean, for example, in the Samoan context, in the Samoan reading, they're looking at the title and looking at the models and going like, I know that model who's related to this and this and this. And then so it's a two different kind of reading. They're both valid. But I wanted to create Paradise Camp so that, even when it's presented in Samoa, you might know who Gauguin is, which is really irrelevant. You could see this fabulous group of people, posing in these, fabulous ways and owning the camera, making love to the camera.
So like independent of Gauguin, it makes sense in Samoa.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, I mean, I guess it's it's open to interpretation, but the presentation of the photographs will be accompanied by the archives, that underpins the reason why I made it. Yeah.
Context, no? Yeah.
Yes.
Or the discursive environment. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Some more questions from the floor. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I actually just have a very small question. I'm curious about the typography and how you developed a little bit of the exhibition design and the, you earlier you said you referenced a bit about the power of words. So I'm curious how you developed the typography for the exhibition and project.
So typography. The font. So the font is by a Samoan font designer by the name of I forgot his name. Sorry, the jet lag has kicked in. So I made sure that the branding of the exhibition was all Samoan-centered. So the typography was Samoan, even all the symbols that I use, that accompanies the branding of Paradise Camp was also inspired by Samoan barcloth painting traditions. So that... so when you engage with the Paradise Camp project, you know that you're actually getting a slice of Samoa, So the specificity was very important for me. Yeah. And then the costumes that the girls were wearing, with the flower prints and the tattoo patterns, like all of that was deliberate, And then, so, when I was sharing all my progress on social media, like all the Fa'afinis and Sāmoa were crazy for the fact that, not only they're actually wearing, Samoan clothing, but with Samoan patterns on them, and the whole world was looking at them. So, yeah, I always say to myself, like, when I create a work, I always ask myself, like, who is it that I want to empower with the work that I do? There you go. paradisecamp.ws. So that's the official touring website. So when I thought about Paradise Camp, like who is the audience that I want to empower, and that was Fa'afafine and Fa'atama, and then so I believe I'm doing that, and then so anything that happens, I guess after the opening in Samoa is a bonus.
You mentioned that Fa'afafine becomes some kind of encompassing term for LGBT. Is that correct? Encompassing for.
Yes, so the term has evolved, to include the LGBTIQ+ community in Samoa. But even like the gay pride movement is actually very problematic in the Samoan context, particularly with the usage of the flag, because the thing is that the term LGBTIQ+ is really problematic because it actually came out of a Western disease model, Western medical disease model, right? And then so, Fa'afafine Fa'atamas, we're not a disease model. And then secondly, I think the gay pride movement also overshadows our indigenous queer identities. And we always have to constantly remind ourselves amongst Fa'afafine and Fa'atama is that these are the words that were developed by our ancestors and we should stick by it. Because I think once you start calling yourself like under the LGBTIQ+ label, we kind of have to sort of navigate that world, which is really problematic for us because, there is such thing as like queer capitalists. And that's, and there's pink money, and then that pink money and all their glitter that they spread everywhere in their parade is not good for the environment, But, we use it as a point of reference, but it's not necessarily sort of fully submitting ourselves, into those labels. And then so in terms of like with the rainbow flag, so in Samoa we call the rainbow Nua Nua. And then so Nua Nua, metaphorically, in the Samoan indigenous reference, is the bridge that we cross over to meet with our ancestors. So when you wave that, sort of rainbow flag at us, so are they trying to meet with ancestors, but they don't want to meet with their ancestors. Actually, they don't care about their ancestors. So this is where we also have kind of like this conflicting view, worldview, about, how we prioritize things. Yeah. Because, we prioritize our kinship system and our land. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, please, yeah.
Now that you've done this, and I was just wondering what you're working on now, and it seems like you've been able to bring forth a very rich cultural history, art, narrative, and also what we talked about in the previous lecture about really bridging, and comparing the Western and indigenous art traditions with your Gauguin and Sāmoa, which, by the way, was fantastic and great research. So where are you headed to from here now?
So each time Paradise Camp tours a place, I produce a new work. So this is so that, when people see the touring exhibition, they don't see the same thing that was presented in the previous iteration. So my thinking is ongoing, and I'm still sort of developing new work in the frame of Paradise Camp, but that's not the only thing that I'm creating. So at the moment, I'm currently looking into to the Samoan idea of how Samoans in pre-contact believed that their ancestors came from Jupiter, the planet Jupiter. Yeah. So I'm kind of sort of working around that at the moment. Yeah. So, you know, like once you kind of like establish a frame for something like Paradise Camp, like, okay, these are the codes, these are the limitations. And then so, you know, each time it tours, I create a new work for it. But yeah, I mean, I show work concurrently everywhere.
And you're working on Darwin also? Charles
Oh, there was
Darwin?
supposed to be a secret. Okay.
Okay.
Okay, so the new work that I'm actually making for the Paradise Camp at the Sainsbury Center for Visual Arts is called Darwin Drag. It's to follow this narrative of how I think just recently scholars have discovered Darwin's journals and then how he actually documented queer aesthetics in animal kingdom. But Darwin didn't openly share it, you know, during the Victorian Christian era because of fear of being persecuted. So I'm making work around that. Yeah. Yeah, so please come to Samoa and come to the UK.
Questions? More questions? I think we have time. Yeah, Fang.
Thank you so much for the fabulous presentation. A question concerning, having the conversation about indigeneity in the context of actually majority of unfortunately, the notion of country and nation state within the Pacific region, because lots of community and islands are very much right now as part of the legacy of settler colonialism. I mean, since this particular project started within a national pavilion, I wonder how you reconcile that question and also creating the space to, also response to that legacy of settler colonialism in this particular context, because I think it is a shared concern among lots of artists along the kind of Pacific region as well. Really appreciate to hear your thoughts.
It's a national pavilion. So how do you see the relationship between the national pavilion of New Zealand and indigeneity of Samoan culture, as well as the queer subjectivity of the Fa'afafine? So, yeah.
So the link between Fa'afafine and New Zealand, unfortunately, is the Crime Ordinance Act of 1961. That's the direct connection. And then so I kind of feel like this colonial forces is something that is visualized by Gauguin. That came like the pan representation of the Pacific region. And then so that's how I kind of weave it in. And then so people have asked me, so if you criticize New Zealand, then why are you taking New Zealand taxpayer money to create Paradise Camp? Well, I kind of see it as a form of reparations, to empower a sexual and gender minority community that the New Zealand government was responsible for ostracizing us within the gender cultural matrix of Samoa. And then so what I'm hoping that the kind of conversation that it will have in Samoa when Paradise Camp tours the island is to talk about the restoration of the four genders and how we can work together, in combating the impacts of climate change, where many of the reports that talks about climate change in the Pacific and specifically Samoa is always written through like the gender binary lens. The gender binary lens, that we are sort of totally sort of eliminated from the equation. But, if they want our developing country to be an independent country, then one of the ways in which that maybe perhaps we can do that is to actually go back to the ways of our ancestors. But it's not that easy. But what I'm presenting is a proposition, and then I hope that my proposition could maybe perhaps start a conversation. The Samoan Prime Minister has graciously agreed to come and open the exhibition. So I'm hoping that it will be in their radar. Yeah.
4 genders, Yuki, come from ancestral knowledge, right?
Yes.
But are there only 4 now in the contemporary time?
Well, I mean, the thing is that in pre-context Samoa, there wasn't a word like fa'afafine or fa'atama, because in the context of anthropology, there's a word called marked. Marked. So marked, marked meaning that, you're marked for your difference. So, okay, where I'm going with this. Okay, so in pre-contact Samoa, there wasn't a word like fa'afafine or fa'atama because we weren't marked for our difference. It's only, in post-contact, where our difference was marked, outside of the 2 heteronormative genders. But Samoa's a deeply, deeply religious Christian country. And Samoan Christianity is a syncretic Christianity. It's a relationship of push and pull between indigenous spirituality and Christian religion. So trying to sort of fit the 4 gender matrix in the context of Christianity is something that I'm struggling with. But it's not just me, but the people in the community are also trying to carve our way into the church. I don't go to church, but the church is very important to the Fa'afafine and Fa'atama community. They're the set decorators of the church. Yeah. And they're Sunday school teachers, so on and so forth. And then so I'm also critical about Christianity, but I also understand the role in which that Fa'afafine and Fa'atama play within the church. So I respect that as well.
Chance? Maybe last question. Maybe my last question for me. Yeah. Yuki, I'm interested because of art history, right? And I was thinking if Fa'afafine can become an art historical category. Now that's been embedded in a critique of Gauguin and of modernism and so on and so forth. So as I am thinking that, I am led to the translation of Fa'afafine as in the manner of
a woman.
Yeah. So I'm interested in the word manner, no? Yeah. So like some kind of transformation or aesthetic, I don't know. So do you see something there in that formulation of in the manner of?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So firstly, Fa'afafine and Fa'atama is a growing discourse amongst sociologists and anthropologists. So, I would say that, there is a growing literature around Fa'afafine studies. You know what? I'm going to tell you another thing. And I'll tell you another thing in relation to that. So there is another Fa'afafine. His name is Dan Taulalapa McMullen. So he's an artist. And then so in Dan's research, he talks about how the moment when the West developed the idea about queer is around the same time that all this literature about third gender in the Pacific started circulating in Europe. So all this gay movement, if their explorers didn't come across Fa'afafine, then gay pride wouldn't have happened. Because it's only through the encounter, the colonial encounter with the Fa'afafine, that the West realized what queerness is. So in a way, we're responsible for their understanding of queerness. Yeah. Dan McMullen, Dan Talalapa McMullen. So what's the other question? Okay, manner of. Well, the thing is that, the reason why I am called a fa'afafine is because, in the manner of a woman, because I'm not a woman, but I am in the manner of a woman. And then so in Samoan culture, the word fafine is actually a married woman. A married woman. So I take on the role of a married woman, which is, take care of children, take care of the family, backbone of the family, and things like that. And then so hence why, that's our role as caregivers, of young children and the elderly, but we contribute to our family, much wider than that, including financially. Yeah. But our role is constantly being redefined, as globalization continues to occur. So we're in a very interesting space.
In the manner, Yuki, what does it include? Is it like mode of dress? Is it gesture? Is it the way you speak?
All of the above. All of the above. Yeah. So there are Samoan gay men that struggle with the term fa'afafine because, they are not
in the manner of a woman.
They're not in the manner of a woman. So they're also, looking towards, finding their own meaning within the Samoan cultural context. Yeah. But when you come to Samoa and you visit the Fa'afafine community, majority of us are trans and non-binary, which is the opposite to like the Western gay movement. So when you go to Western gay movements, it's all like sort of white, like, gay men. They're the one that kind of dominate the queer scene. But in Samoa, it's the other way around. Honey. It's the queens. It's the girls that kind of rule everything. Yeah.
Maybe on that note.
Yeah,
I would like to thank Yuki for this wonderful sharing.
And thank you very much, Patrick, for your time. And thank you all.